You finally did it. The project you poured everything into, it succeeded. The fight you've been fighting for years, you won. The goal you've been chasing, you reached it. And now you can barely get out of bed. You thought victory would feel different. Relief, joy, energy. Instead, you feel empty, exhausted, questioning everything. And a small, terrifying voice in your head whispers, "What if I just stopped?" You're not broken. You're not weak. You're not faithless. You're experiencing something that's been happening to faithful, hardworking people for thousands of years. Because 2,800 years ago, the most famous prophet in the Hebrew Bible, the man who called down fire from heaven, sat under a tree in the wilderness and prayed, "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life." This is the story most people skip. But it might be the story you need most. Elijah. You probably know him as the fire-calling prophet, the Mount Carmel hero, man of unshakable faith. Maybe you remember the still small voice. Some of you know he ran from Queen Jezebel. But here's what the Sunday school versions leave out. After his greatest victory, fire from heaven, 450 prophets of Baal defeated, the nation turned back to God. Elijah ran 90 miles south, collapsed in the wilderness, and begged God to end his life. And God's response wasn't a sermon about faith. It was food, sleep, silence, and a 40-day journey where God would meet him in his exhaustion, not his victory. So here's what we're going to learn today. How to recognize burnout even when you're successful. Why victory can trigger collapse, and what that means about how we're wired. What God actually does when faithful people fall apart. Spoiler, it's not what you've been taught. And how to hear the whisper when the spectacle has left you empty. Because the Bible doesn't hide this story. It documents Elijah's breakdown in clinical detail. And what God does next might change how you think about exhaustion, mental health, and what it means to be faithful. Let's start with who Elijah was, and why this story matters so much. A prophet in ancient Israel wasn't a fortune teller or a mystical figure detached from reality. A prophet was a spokesperson for God who confronted power. They delivered messages, usually uncomfortable ones, to kings, priests, and people. Called out injustice. Challenged idolatry. Warned of consequences. And they did this while living under the authority of the very people they criticized. Elijah operated during the reign of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, rulers who had actively promoted Baal worship and killed prophets of the Lord. Being a prophet wasn't a safe job. It was dangerous. Prophets often worked alone. Yes, there were sons of the prophets, communities of prophetic apprentices, but the major prophets frequently stood isolated against entire power structures. Elijah spent years in hiding, lived by a brook, stayed with a widow in Zarephath. When he confronted Ahab at Mount Carmel, it was him against 450 prophets of Baal backed by royal authority. One man, one God, against an empire. Imagine the weight. You're the sole voice speaking truth to a regime that kills dissenters. Your message isn't popular. Your life is in constant danger. You have no institutional support. And you're expected to be certain, faithful, unflinching. Ancient Near Eastern prophets carried immense psychological and spiritual burdens. Elijah's world was one where speaking for God could cost you everything. And it frequently did. 1 Kings, chapter 18. This is the context for everything that follows. Israel was in crisis. King Ahab had married Jezebel, a Phoenician princess who brought Baal worship with her. The royal court promoted foreign gods. Prophets of the Lord were being killed. And there had been no rain for 3 years. Elijah had announced the drought as judgment. Now, after years in hiding, God sent him back to confront Ahab. Elijah summoned all Israel to Mount Carmel, a coastal mountain in northern Israel. He proposed a test. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him. The people said nothing. So Elijah set the terms: 2 altars, 2 sacrifices. The 450 prophets of Baal would call on their God. Elijah would call on the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. The prophets of Baal went first. They prepared the bull, built the altar, called on Baal from morning until noon. Baal, answer us. Nothing. They danced around the altar. Elijah mocked them, shout louder. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. So they shouted louder, cut themselves with swords and spears until blood flowed. Midday passed. Afternoon came. Still nothing. No response. No voice. No fire. Then it was Elijah's turn. He repaired the altar of the Lord, arranged the wood, placed the bull on top. And then, just to make it impossible, he ordered water poured over everything. 3 times. 12 jars total. The water soaked the sacrifice, the wood, the stones. Filled the trench around the altar. Then Elijah prayed. Not a long prayer. Not dramatic. Just a simple request. Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Answer me, Lord, answer me. Then the fire fell. It consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, even the water in the trench. The people fell prostrate. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Elijah ordered the prophets of Baal seized and executed. The drought ended. Rain came. Israel turned back to God. This was it. The moment Elijah had been working toward for years. Public vindication. Baal defeated. The people returned. The drought broken. By every metric, this was complete success. Elijah ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to Jezreel, about 17 miles, empowered by the hand of the Lord. He must have felt invincible. And then Jezebel sent her message. When Ahab told Jezebel what Elijah had done at Mount Carmel, the fire, the execution of her prophets, she sent Elijah a message. May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. One of them. The dead prophets. By this time tomorrow. It was a death threat. Direct. Specific. Time-stamped. And Elijah knew her track record. She had killed prophets before. She had the power. The resources. The ruthlessness. Despite everything at Mount Carmel, Jezebel was still in control. And Elijah was alone. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. That's the text. 1 Kings 19, verse 3. The man who just called down fire from heaven was afraid. And he ran. From Jezreel in the north to Beersheba in the south, over 90 miles. Beersheba was in Judah, not Israel. Different kingdom. Outside Ahab and Jezebel's direct jurisdiction. He was fleeing to safety. Crossing a border. Putting distance between himself and the threat. This wasn't a casual journey. 90 miles on foot through difficult terrain would have taken days. Days of running. Days of fear. Days of adrenaline and exhaustion. When he reached Beersheba, he left his servant there. The text doesn't explain why. Maybe he didn't want to endanger him. Maybe he wanted to be alone. Or maybe isolation was already setting in. Burnout and depression often drive people toward solitude, not the healthy kind, but the kind that cuts you off from support. Elijah had just performed one of the most public acts in Israel's history. Fire from heaven. A nation watching. Now he was alone in the wilderness. He didn't stop at Beersheba. He went another day's journey into the wilderness beyond the town. Into the Negev. Harsh, barren, unforgiving. He sat down under a broom tree, a desert shrub that offers sparse shade in the relentless sun. And there, in the wilderness, exhausted and alone, Elijah prayed. I have had enough, Lord. Take my life, I am no better than my ancestors. That's the prayer. 1 Kings 19, verse 4. Not, help me. Not, protect me. Not, give me strength. Take my life. This is one of the Bible's most direct expressions of suicidal ideation. Elijah doesn't want to keep going. He's done. Finished. And he's praying to God about it. Let that sink in. The Bible includes a story where a faithful prophet, immediately after a massive spiritual victory, tells God he wants to die. This isn't framed as sin. It's not rebuked as lack of faith. It's presented as honest human exhaustion. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. No dramatic intervention. No angelic choir. No voice from heaven saying, "Buck up, prophet." He prayed to die. And then he fell asleep. Sleep is the body's response to overwhelming stress. When you can't process anymore, you shut down. Elijah wasn't being lazy. He was depleted. Emotionally, physically, spiritually. And God's first response wasn't a sermon. It was rest. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." That's how God responds to a suicidal prophet. Not with a lecture. With food. Elijah wakes up. An angel has touched him. There's fresh baked bread and a jar of water by his head. Get up and eat. That's it. No theology. No explanation. No, let me tell you why you shouldn't feel this way. Just eat. So Elijah ate and drank. And lay down again. Physical needs first. Food. Water. More rest. The angel came back a second time. Touched him again. Woke him up again. Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. Notice what the angel says, the journey is too much for you. Not, you're weak. Not, you lack faith. Not, try harder. The journey is too much. That's validation. Acknowledgement that what Elijah is facing is genuinely difficult, too difficult to face without care. Here's what God doesn't say to the prophet who just prayed to die. Snap out of it. You just saw fire from heaven, why are you depressed? Other prophets have it worse. Just pray more. You're being dramatic. Instead, God gives him food, water, rest, twice. And then, strengthened by that provision, Elijah traveled 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. 40 days and 40 nights. That phrase should sound familiar. Moses spent 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai receiving the law. Israel wandered 40 years in the wilderness. Jesus fasted 40 days in the wilderness before beginning his ministry. 40 is a recurring biblical number, often associated with testing, preparation, transformation. Elijah's journey to Horeb echoes Moses deliberately. He's retracing sacred geography, going to the mountain where Moses met God. Horeb and Sinai are the same place, the mountain of divine encounter. 40 days is a long time. That's more than a month of traveling. Through wilderness. Alone. God doesn't rush Elijah. There's no instant healing. No quick fix. No, you're fine now, after one angelic meal. Elijah needed time. Space. A journey. Recovery from burnout isn't fast. It's slow. It requires rest, nourishment, and often, a long period of withdrawal before re-engagement. The text honors that. Sometimes the only way forward is to go back to the beginning. To the foundational places. The places where God has met people before. For Elijah, that's Horeb. The mountain where Moses saw the burning bush. Where the law was given. Where covenant was made. If Elijah is going to encounter God again, it won't be in the spotlight of Mount Carmel. It will be in the wilderness. In the cave. In the silence. After 40 days of travel, Elijah arrived at Horeb, the mountain of God. And he found a cave. Horeb, also called Sinai, is where Moses encountered God. Where the burning bush flamed. Where the 10 Commandments were given. Where covenant was established. This is holy ground. The mountain where Israel was formed as a people under God. And Elijah, exhausted and alone, crawls into a cave. Caves in biblical narrative often represent refuge, hiddenness, and encounter. Elijah isn't in a palace. Not in a temple. Not in public. He's in a cave. Hidden. Withdrawn. Small. This is the posture of burnout, retreating into confined, dark spaces. Withdrawing from visibility. Seeking shelter from overwhelm. But caves are also where God meets people. Moses, when he asked to see God's glory, was placed in the cleft of a rock while God's presence passed by. And the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" God doesn't demand. Doesn't accuse. Asks a question. What are you doing here? Not, why did you run? Not, how dare you abandon your post? Just, what are you doing here? It's an invitation to articulate, to name what's happening, to speak. Elijah answers, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Notice what he says. I've worked hard. I've been faithful. The mission failed. They turned away. I've watched my colleagues die. I'm alone. Isolated. Unsupported. I'm in danger. The threat is real. This is the voice of burnout speaking. High effort, low results. Isolation. Threat. Loss of perspective. I am the only one left, factually false, but emotionally true. God listens. Doesn't interrupt. Doesn't correct yet. Just lets Elijah speak. The Lord said, Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. God is about to pass by. This echoes Moses. When Moses asked to see God's glory, God passed by, proclaiming his name. Now Elijah will experience the same thing. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. A wind so powerful it broke rocks. But God wasn't in it. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. The ground shook. The mountain trembled. But God wasn't there either. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. Fire. The very element Elijah called down at Mount Carmel. The sign of God's power. The dramatic, undeniable proof. But God wasn't in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. Or, in other translations, a sound of sheer silence. A still small voice. A soft murmuring sound. The Hebrew is difficult to translate precisely. But the contrast is clear. Wind. Earthquake. Fire. Dramatic, loud, powerful. God, in the quiet. Elijah's prophetic career had been marked by dramatic displays. Drought. Ravens bringing food. Fire from heaven at Carmel. High stakes, public, powerful. But here, at Horeb, God doesn't show up in spectacle. He shows up in silence. The still small voice. Why? Maybe because Elijah doesn't need more drama. He's exhausted by intensity. Maybe because God is reorienting him. The prophetic life isn't just about public miracles. It's about quiet faithfulness. Maybe because this is what Elijah needs now, not more adrenaline, but gentleness. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Elijah recognizes the presence of God, covers his face, stands at the cave entrance. And the question comes again. What are you doing here, Elijah? The same question, word for word. God already heard the answer. Elijah already explained. So why ask again? Maybe because articulating trauma takes repetition. You don't process deep pain in one telling. You have to say it again. And again. Maybe because God is giving Elijah space to see if his perspective has shifted after the wind, earthquake, fire, and silence. Elijah answers. I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Word. 4. Word. The same answer. Nothing has changed in Elijah's perspective. He's still stuck in the same narrative. I worked hard. They failed. I'm alone. They want to kill me. He's not wrong about the danger. Jezebel's threat was real. But he is wrong about being alone. And God is about to correct that. God doesn't say, you're being dramatic. He doesn't say, stop feeling sorry for yourself. He gives Elijah 3 things. First, a mission. Go back the way you came, and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also, anoint Jehu son of Nimshi king over Israel, and anoint Elisha son of Shaphat to succeed you as prophet. Elijah isn't finished. There's still work to do. But notice, he's not going back alone. He's being sent to commission others. Hazael, Jehu, and especially, Elisha. Elisha will be Elijah's successor. His companion. His apprentice. God is addressing the isolation. Second, a corrected perspective. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him. 7,000. Elijah said, I am the only one left. God says, there are 7,000 you haven't seen. Burnout narrows vision. Depression lies. It tells you you're alone when you're not. God doesn't shame Elijah for his distorted perspective. He just corrects it gently. You're not alone. There's a community you can't see right now. But it's there. Third, a plan that includes help. Elijah will go back to work. But not alone. Elisha will join him. Be with him. Eventually take over. The rest of Elijah's story includes Elisha at his side. God's solution to prophetic burnout isn't, try harder. It's, you need a companion. So what do we learn from Elijah's breakdown? One of the most surprising aspects of this story is the timing. Elijah didn't collapse before Mount Carmel. He collapsed after. After the victory. After the vindication. After the fire from heaven. This pattern is common. You pour everything into a project, a campaign, a season of work. You push through on adrenaline and determination. You succeed. And then you fall apart. Why? Because your body and mind were running on borrowed energy. The adrenaline kept you going. The stakes kept you sharp. But once the crisis is over, the bill comes due. Elijah experienced this at a biochemical level. After years of high-stakes prophetic work, culminating in the Mount Carmel showdown, his body crashed. Jezebel's threat was the trigger. But the exhaustion was already there. People experiencing post-victory burnout often feel guilt. I should be grateful. We won. Why am I not happy? I accomplished what I set out to do. Why do I feel worse? Elijah could have thought the same thing. Fire from heaven. National repentance. Rain. Victory. Why was he praying to die? Because success doesn't erase exhaustion. Accomplishment doesn't automatically replenish you. You can be faithful and still be burned out. You can be effective and still be depressed. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. When Elijah prayed to die, God didn't give him a sermon. He gave him food. When Elijah isolated in the wilderness, God didn't demand he return to ministry immediately. He gave him a 40-day journey to process. When Elijah repeated the same distorted narrative twice, God didn't shame him. He corrected his perspective gently and gave him a companion. God's response to Elijah's burnout follows a clear pattern. First, physical care. Food, water, sleep. God addresses Elijah's body before his theology. Second, time and space. 40 days to Horeb. No rush. No, get back to work immediately. Recovery takes time. Third, listening without interrupting. Elijah gets to say his piece. Twice. God listens. Fourth, gentle correction. There are 7,000 you haven't seen, not harsh, just information. Fifth, practical support. Go anoint Elisha. Get a companion. Share the load. The solution to burnout isn't working harder. It's distributing the work and having people with you. Wind, earthquake, fire. God wasn't in any of them. He was in the silence. Everything in our world rewards spectacle. Loud, fast, viral, dramatic. But Elijah's encounter at Horeb disrupts all of that. God shows up in quiet. The still small voice isn't about volume. It's about attention. You can't hear a whisper if you're not listening. For Elijah, the reorientation was crucial. His entire prophetic career had been marked by dramatic signs. But sustainable faithfulness doesn't run on adrenaline. It runs on quiet, consistent attention to God's presence. I am the only one left. Elijah said it twice. And he was wrong. There were 7,000 who hadn't bowed to Baal. He just couldn't see them. Burnout and depression distort perception. They tell you, no one understands. No one cares. You're carrying this alone. These feelings are real. But they're not always accurate. God doesn't say, Elijah, stop exaggerating. He says, let me show you what you can't see right now. There are 7,000. If you're feeling alone right now, there are people you can't see. But they're there. And eventually, your vision will clear enough to recognize them. The prophet who called down fire from heaven wanted to die. God's response wasn't rebuke. It was rest. That's the story. Elijah's breakdown teaches us several crucial things. First, burnout can happen to faithful people. You don't have to be sinning to be exhausted. Second, success doesn't prevent collapse. In fact, breakdown often comes after victory. Third, God cares about bodies. Physical needs aren't less important than spiritual ones. Fourth, recovery is slow. 40 days to Horeb. No shortcuts. No instant healing. Fifth, isolation distorts perception. Burnout lies. It tells you you're alone when you're not. Sixth, God meets us in the quiet. Not in wind, earthquake, or fire. In the still small voice. Seventh, the solution to burnout includes companionship. God didn't tell Elijah to work harder. He gave him Elisha. If you're exhausted, you have permission to rest. Not because you've earned it. Because you need it. You have permission to be honest. With God. With others. With yourself. You have permission to take time. 40 days. 40 weeks. However long recovery takes. You have permission to ask for help. You're not supposed to carry everything alone. You have permission to believe you're not alone. Even when you can't see the 7,000. They're there. Elijah didn't stay in the cave. He went back. Anointed kings. Called Elisha. Continued his prophetic work. But he didn't go back alone. And he didn't go back unchanged. He'd learned something at Horeb. God doesn't just show up in fire. He shows up in rest. In provision. In companionship. In the quiet. And sometimes, the most faithful thing you can do is stop running, sit under a tree, and let God feed you. This is the whole story, where we explore biblical narratives with the depth, context, and complexity they actually have. If you appreciate thoughtful biblical content that takes its time and respects your intelligence, subscribe to this channel. New episodes weekly. Next time, we'll explore another story you think you know, but deeper than you've heard it. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. See you next time.